Hey there, my name is Keesu, or more commonly known as Johnny, and in this video, I'm going to be talking through the B2B SaaS Growth Playbook that I have built over years of experience. What's been happening over the past couple of days is I've been having a lot of calls with a couple of B2B SaaS founders that are kind of targeting that mid-size to enterprise level, and what I've noticed is the same sort of questions and same sort of problems are sort of cropping up. So what I decided to do was kind of give back to the community a little. I've now been working with B2B SaaS companies in the growth marketing space for about 3 to 5 years now. Had a lot of experience being able to work with really wonderful people who have taught me so much. And so what I thought I'd do is I just create this document over here that goes through, in essence, the decision framework that I've been using to create the best strategies for B2B SaaS companies, specifically for that enterprise level. And what I kind of want to avoid here is just giving generic cookie cutter sort of templated advice that just says, oh, just run paid ads or just do content or just do direct outbound. I kind of want to give a more nuanced approach where possible, because from my conversations what I'm learning is that sometimes, especially for founders who don't have that growth marketing background or B2B marketing background, RevOps, whatever it is, it can get really overwhelming to decide what to work on first. And I think a lot of people have tried a lot of strategies and they have found a lot of things that don't work. And unfortunately, that is the reality of marketing. But what I'm hoping is that in this video, we'll be able to kind of distill and understand what path to take when and apply it to your unique situation. So I've got a framework over here that I want to go through today, and I'll go through that as well. But to start with, I thought I would go through the table of contents for this presentation. I've tried to keep it lengthy enough that you can get some sort of value out of it, but not so long that you get overwhelmed with the nitty-gritty of all the details. So what I'll be covering today is going to be who this is for, the challenges that I'm trying to solve for this document, the decision framework, like I mentioned before, that I'm using to kind of create strategies that try to minimize waste where possible, some actual tactics, some AI use cases. A lot of people are asking how we're using AI to drive campaign success, and a little bit about myself at the end if you are interested, right? And so what I really want to do is start off with who this is for, right? This document is really geared towards SaaS companies that are targeting more mid-sized to enterprise level companies. So it's not really B2C geared. There's separate strategies I have for that. And this is really for companies that have some degree of product market fit, who have paying customers and have some proof of concept, but they have an issue with scaling because of manual outreach efforts. I know a couple of companies I've spoken to are using things like networking. They're using unpredictable channels like newsletters, for example. There's complex buyer's journeys. So because your clients are sort of in that mid-size to large enterprise level, it requires a lot of decision makers and long sales cycles. And so generally there's a need to try and automate some of the systems, because some companies are very founder-led growth, and that's great. And the founder can be a great channel for growth, but it means that it's very dependent on one person. And in any system, over-dependency on a single variable can introduce some degree of fragility. So, you might be targeting companies like Snowflake, Slack, Zendesk, or, these might be types of SaaS companies you are. What I'm trying to solve in this document is trying to get over that sort of reliance on networking, avoiding situations where you try and invest into one platform too heavily and it garners no results. So trying to following up with that, trying to understand resource constraints and figure out where to focus your efforts first and in what order. Trying to solve for unclear lead attributions, or trying to really make sure that the data is clean so that you can actually figure out what channels are driving the best results, and demystifying that sort of enterprise level sales complexity as well. So without further ado, I want to start with the framework. I've got this diagram over here. It's definitely oversimplified in many respects, but I kind of want to walk you through sort of the framework, at least, or how I think of things when thinking about what should we do first. There's essentially only 3 ways that you can get customers. You can reach out to them directly, so that's outbound, or there's content, and then there's paid ads, right? So what I've done actually further down is I've broken down the different platforms and how to think about choosing which platform to use. So before you even get to that stage though, you kind of have to start thinking about, well, which is a problem? Do we have not enough leads, or is it that we have enough leads and we're not utilizing them effectively, right? And so this number, I've put more or less than 1,000 in the database. And in fact, maybe the first step, step 0 in this would be to actually assess what this threshold is, right? But that's why I said, if you've been running for a couple of years, you will kind of know if you have not enough leads or enough leads, right? Based on your sales targets, let's say you want to hit a certain number of sales targets, you should know roughly how many leads to SQLs to sales that you actually get. And so you should be able to backwards calculate, okay, in order to hit the sales targets, I need X amount of leads. I'm not going to go through that today. But if you want some help with that, I can help you figure that out. So let's start on the left-hand side. So typically, a lot of companies that I talk to say there's not enough leads, so they want to generate more leads. Now, the million-dollar question typically is, well, which channel do we use? There's so many channels. There's content, right? There's direct outreach, and like I said, there's paid ads, right? So how do you know which one to use, right? So what I've done is I've broken this down into type of marketing, the pros and cons of each channel, when to use it, how to maximize the channel, and sort of the various factors that you have to take into account, like cost, speed of getting data, and the degree of scalability, right? And a couple of things, my experience as well, if you're interested in that. I'm not going to go through that today, but this is something that you can look up later on. The thing you want to really consider is what stage you're currently at, right? So if you have already existing channels and you feel like you're exhausting them or they just don't scale, then you kind of want to start looking at other channels, right? So a company that I'm speaking to, they have a problem where the founder is just going to networking events and it works, but it just doesn't scale, right? In which case you start looking for other channels. If you feel like you haven't exhausted this channel, and I'll talk about channels that are kind of difficult to exhaust, then you kind of want to optimize them until you have exhausted that channel. We'll start introducing new channels when you feel like you're just about at the point of exhaustion. If you don't have existing channels, obviously you go to the next sort of decision point and you think about, well, can we actually search for the decision maker, right? So in B2B, typically you're dealing with decision makers, right? So is this decision maker someone that you can find? In most situations in B2B, I do find that it is possible. And so you definitely want to consider some form of cold outbound. If you've never done any form of cold outbound before, I highly recommend it. These days, there's so many use cases for AI, and I'll do a separate video on how to use AI platforms like clay.com to connect lots of data sources together to create workflows that will allow you to find the perfect ideal prospects, right? So for example, in Clay, not to get too deep into it, you can actually go ahead and let's say you're trying to target a CMO or a CFO, CTO, or your software is designed perhaps for a CFO, right? Or a very niche job title like CISO, for example, right? And let's say you want to get in the conversation before they decided on software for that person to use. Let's say you're Xero and you want to go to the accounting software and you want to reach decision makers before they actually decide on getting into a long contract with a different vendor, right? You want to get into that conversation early. You can actually, the moment that they decide to open up that job position that suits your software, you can actually scrape that information with data points at Amplify to try and find those job openings and engage in that conversation and enter that pipeline earlier than all your other competitors. And you can, do this at scale with AI personalization now. You can use ChatGPT to help you really craft a really personalized message, but do so at scale, right? Because we can't be sitting there all day just writing emails, right? At least, you can, but it gets quite cost ineffective after a while. You put that into an auto sender and then you keep doing that and you refine the messaging. I'm going to do an entire separate video on how I go about cold outbound. But if you've never tried this before, this is for me the very first place that you start, right? And if you have then exhausted this, right? So as I mentioned before, the downside of direct outreach is that it's very low cost to start and it's very fast to get feedback. But the downside is that it doesn't have that much scale because you're reliant on other databases to kind of do the heavy lifting for you, right? So things like Apollo, things like Ocean, all these databases, eventually they might tap out. If you go at enough scale and you go hard enough, you will tap out and you kind of need to find other channels to find new ideal prospects. And so this is where things like paid media can come in, right? And from this, you can start thinking about, okay, well, is the product visual? Do people search for the product or a certain solution? If the product is very visual and you have to be able to see it to understand it, you want to use interactive platforms like Meta or LinkedIn. Each of these have pros and cons in terms of costs. So for example, Meta has much lower cost than LinkedIn, but you might get lower quality leads. LinkedIn, very, very expensive. And so what you kind of want to do over time is start assessing each of these channels and tracking all of your metrics. And we'll get into the importance of a CRM later to actually figure out, okay, I've worked with a SaaS company that tried every single channel, and for whatever reason, they were B2B SaaS and Meta just worked the best for them. And I didn't think that would be possible. It depends on your target segment. Sometimes, there are a lot of users on Meta. The problem is that you just have a lot lower quality because they're not there to do business, right? They're being interrupted for any other reason. But if you get enough of them and for low enough cost, it kind of balances out such that, it becomes a better channel. Sometimes Google is better. It really depends. And sometimes you just have to sit down and really think about, okay, well, are people searching for a particular problem? Just because they aren't particularly searching for your software and you don't really have a target segment name for it, let's say, Loom, like just because people aren't looking for the word screen recorder, you can interrupt people with paid search using PPC by using terms like, how do I, become more productive? Platforms like Todoist, they have some great resources and articles on how to become more productive, and then they just add their software in at the end. So there's all sorts of things you can do, and I'll maybe create a separate video on how to maximize each of these channels. But in general, for Meta, you kind of want to have really good creatives. You want to try and reach a broad market by giving value and showcasing the main benefits of the product from the get-go. And with Google, you kind of want to meet them by trying to solve problems for them. LinkedIn, similar to Meta, but you just want to be targeting specific demographics, because in LinkedIn, you can really target or define target audience and specific job titles. That's why it's really expensive. So that's something that you want to think about. And then there's content as well, which I haven't put in here. I like to use content so content is a different ballgame. So if you go back to the table that I broke down here, content is fantastic for longer term scale and building great authority. The only problem is that, as many people have found out, it can take time. And because it takes so much time to get going, you don't get immediate feedback. And so content is not one of those things where you can attribute nearly as easily as you can with some of the other channels. Of course, one thing you have to bear in mind is that when you're doing some calculations like this, you can't always directly, Meta might have influence on Google and vice versa. Both content, it can be a little bit trickier to attribute simply because the buyer journey is a little bit more complex. And that goes the same for all sorts of marketing, no matter what channel. But content, the downside of content, whilst it has great scalability, is that it technically, some people say it's free because you're not paying on an actual platform to put the content out there, but you're paying for the time that it takes to get it to rank anywhere, and it's really difficult to try and see if you're making the right sort of progress. But it's definitely something that I think pairs really well with all these other channels. So I'll talk about creating an ecosystem later, but essentially what you want to do is, let's say you are doing some form of cold outbound, you always want to have as a backup later on when you're nurturing some form of content. So content doesn't necessarily mean SEO or posting on social media, right, on these platforms. It also entails things like email marketing, right? So providing resources to them, having your SDRs follow up with them and saying, hey, by the way, I noticed that you had a problem with, let's say you are a security company and you have a security SaaS. Then you say, hey, I noticed that you were trying to get insights about which vulnerabilities you were targeting or you wanted to know about. Here's how you can do that. And you just insert a useful resource, or you show how you do that with a certain software. And you ask them things like, during the sales process, what problem are you having? And then you solve them with your software. But fundamentally, all marketing is just finding what problems people are having and showing that your thing can solve that problem, right? And same way that I'm trying to show you now how your marketing problem can be solved here. You really want to try and understand your customers, talk to them, have conversations, do a lot of research in the beginning, and this is where AI can come in really handy to kind of pair these up really nicely. So let's say somebody's come in as an MQL through paid media. There's now a lot of content that you can do on the back end, and I'll go through how to automate that system later. But you want to be using a good CRM, HubSpot, maybe Salesforce if you're larger enterprise. There's a lot of good softwares out there. Doesn't matter. Some solid CRM that has good level of segmentation and supports a large sales team is what you're going to need here. So that's all the different types of traffic that you can use. So that's if you have a lead problem, right? So let's now talk about the backend. So let's think about evaluating the backend process, right? So one situation that you don't want is to be generating all these leads and not be dealing with them effectively. There's a common problem for sales and marketing to not be aligned. Sometimes the handover between MQ and SQL can be a little bit messy. And so this is where a little bit of RevOps and making sure that your marketing team and sales team are coordinating correctly. You want to assess your funnel, right? So you want to go, say, to this document over here, this Google Doc, which you can click on and get access to. You kind of want to start thinking about, okay, well, what is our cost per lead? What is our lead to SQL book percentage? Is there places that we can improve things? Do we have a good enough show up rate? So let's say SQLs are booking in a call. Are they actually showing up? If their show up rate falls below 50%, then this is something that we need to work on. And there's something about they have that sort of initial that could suggest that, for example, they are interested sort of in what you have to offer, but there's some sort of lack of trust, or there's just lack of follow-up. It can be as simple as that. There's a lot of things that you want to take a look at and try and solve for all of these back-end issues, because traffic costs, for example, whether it's cold email, whether it's LinkedIn, Meta, Google, whatever it is, all these front-end costs continue to increase. So what these back-end automations are able to do is help you to really dial down and make the most out of the leads that you have, so you're not driving a leaky bucket. And so what you want to do is plan out your customer lifecycle, right, and have relevant automations in place similar to this. So I like to map out my sort of customer engagement cycle. I like to see, okay, well, what counts as an MQL? What should we be talking to them about? Depending on what they've asked during the sales process, do we have templates in place to say like, okay, if somebody asks about this, boom, we have an answer for that. And the best sort of sales processes are ones where you can answer anyone's objections before they even get onto the call. So by the time you're on the sales call, there's not a lot really to talk about left, right? So this is the sort of the dream scenario that you want to get to. And it does require sales and marketing constantly coming back to each other in a feedback loop to say, for example, hey, by the way, marketing team, I just got off a sales call. They are not sure about this. And then the marketing team needs to go back and start creating content around it, right? So that before the sales team even gets to that objection, the marketing team's kind of handled it already. And so that sales to marketing feedback loop is what's really important. I wish I'd gotten a diagram of a feedback loop, but hopefully you get the idea, right? You really want to make sure that you have that feedback loop dialed in. And over time, what you're going to want to do is then start, once you've understood what the bottleneck is, where it is, for example, in that sort of sales process, you want to try and see if it can be improved. If it is improved, then you move on to trying to optimize it and building an ecosystem around it, trying to drive more volume in and see if the system scales along with it. Sometimes as you scale, your gross numbers and sales increase, but your cost per acquisition can increase alongside with it. And so your margins might drop as well. And that's something they have to understand. So you want to combine content outbound, you want to combine paid media with cold outreach as well. So somebody's come in as an MQL, you want to reach out to them personally, connect with them on LinkedIn. You want to be able to orchestrate an entire system whereby at the moment somebody comes in, ultimately, eventually what you're trying to do is create an ecosystem where you're hitting them from pretty much every channel. At first, you just want to stick with one, right? So at first, if you already have content, for example, and you haven't done outbound yet, for example, then what you want to do is combine the two of these together to try and nurture your prospect all throughout that sales cycle, right? And then over time, once you have enough feedback, you can then use those insights into paid media. Or if you already have a lot of insights, you can use AI to summarize all the insights, all the pain points, all the problems. You can map that out and put that into a document that you can then use for your marketing campaigns. And so that's what I mean by creating that sort of ecosystem. Some things that, like I mentioned before, some actionable tactics and AI use cases. You can use AI for personalization when you're doing your outreach. You can leverage tools like ChatGPT. Clay, for example, has web researching tools, so they can scrape LinkedIn profiles to see what people have been up to, what comments they've been leaving on LinkedIn. You can engage with them there. You can build a high quality prospect list, right? So you can make sure your data quality is incredibly high. If you just scrape directly out of Apollo and just look for the job title you're looking for, typically you're not going to get great results. So you need some level of filtering, and AI is now at a point where it can do that really, really well. I talked about paid ads for lead generation for when you want to scale, right? At some point, like I said, you're going to tap out of your other sources, for example, and then, creating content, when you have webinars, for example, you kind of want to use customer success stories. You want to try to let people continuously know that you exist and that you are continually solving their problems, especially when the sales cycle is really long, right? So AI-driven strategies, summarizing sales activity, you can analyze sales calls, you can identify recurring objections, share them with the marketing team, like I said. You can use AI for nurturing, right? So in some industries, it makes sense over time. Once you have a database of objections, you can actually start guiding people faster, right? So let's say somebody comes in as an MQL straight away. You can already come in immediately and try and, you can come in and you can start nurturing them right away. So normally you send out these automated emails, but if they ask questions immediately, you can use AI and you can create a database of knowledge that they can access, almost like a customer support desk, right? So a lot of customer support desks now integrate AI. You can do the same thing with a lot of features in a lot of good CRMs, like HubSpot, for example, these days. And you can use that data to then automatically reply for them for when your sales volume gets really, really high. Really exciting stuff happening in the nurturing space using AI, for example, right now. And then you can use personalization, like I mentioned, at scale to make sure that when you're reaching out to people, it's relevant and you don't need to hire someone to sit down and write personalized lines anymore. You can get AI to do that at scale, and it means it's much more automated. So, the team that you're going to need to make this work is you're going to need cold email experts, ad specialists, content specialists, CRM implementers, RevOps individuals to make sure that you can keep that everyone's doing their function correctly. But then you need someone to really bring that together to make that system work as a cohesive whole. And that's kind of where you need, in my opinion, a B2B growth engineer, someone who understands the full ecosystem from end to end, not just, oh, we got a lead, that's fine. Someone who really understands end to end, like, okay, what is the consequence of us getting this lead? Did it really convert into sale? How many of those are converting to MQLs? How many of those are converting to SQLs? Why are they dropping off? How can we improve that? And putting this system together by thinking about the pros and cons of each, If anyone's been to engineering school, one of the first things you learn, I know civil engineers, for example, think about building bridges. Every material has its pros and cons. There's always trade-offs, right? Every single one of these platforms and every single one of these strategies that I've outlined to you here today have trade-offs. And it's really about thinking about, okay, what are the constraints of the system that you have to consider first? So if you are budget tight, start with cold email. If you're struggling to scale, go with paid ads. Like, you need to understand what the pros and cons of each system are, what the potential repercussions are for each of these systems, and fail safes for, if something doesn't go quite to plan, and ways of tracking the data so that you can learn for channels that might not have worked quite as you planned. And then you kind of want to execute as well, right? You want to make sure that you've understood your target market, right? So you need some sort of blend of systems thinking and also creativity and strategy to be able to take the insights from sales teams, from previous conversations, and really craft that into a story and the narrative that is cohesive across the entire sales journey, right? You want to make sure from here to here, the customer feels like they're still talking to the same person. It can be quite difficult to do over time. And it's one of those things that requires refining and working with the team, talking to the sales team, and creating that constant feedback loop. Hopefully I'm not repeating myself too much, but you get the idea. Why you might want to consider me. I have a background in systems engineering. I have an engineering degree. I was a DevOps engineer. And so I came into the marketing world more with a background in that sort of systems mindset. But, I was craving more of a creative role. I think that's why marketing has served me very well up till now. I think sometimes you need a bit of both to lead something like this. If you're a specialist, if you just do cold email, you can just do cold email. But where I think I really thrive is putting these together and creating a strategy where everyone is able to play their part and pulling that together so that everyone's working well together. So if you want something more custom to you, let me know and I can do that. But otherwise, thank you so much for watching this video. I literally created this document in an afternoon, and I'm trying to shoot this as much as possible in one take, except for the beginning parts. So there's going to be a few things that I've missed out and some things that might not make full sense. So I'd love for you to take a look at this document, reply back to me if you have any sort of questions. And would love it if you would engage in a conversation so that I can further improve on this and give more value back to the lovely community that is B2B SaaS. But otherwise, thanks so much for watching all the way to the end. It really means a lot to me. And hopefully I'll talk to you soon. Thanks so much.